Hey, thanks for clicking on the video. Today's build makes use of one of the strongest hidden synergies in all of Destiny 2. One that actually kinda just got recently buffed. This hunter build is something you can take into the endgame for incredible lethality, self and team preservation through overshields and damage reduction, while also outputting impressive DPS. Also, you can stun 2 champs with just 1 grenade. Now, at the time of uploading, episode Revenant is coming to a close, but this build is going to perform incredibly regardless of the current episode. Although you would be a fool to neglect the artifact, and we'll have a small section covering that at the end. Also, on that note, there are timestamps and a dim link to this build down below for your pleasure. But to get straight into it, as any well-informed hunter knows, this build is going to revolve around the hidden synergy between Ex Diris and Mothkeeper's Wraps. This synergy bolsters our survivability and lethality, which you actually might not have known. But where this all begins is with the exotic armor piece. Mothkeeper's Wraps has the perk Winged Eclipse that reads, your grenade becomes a cage of loyal moths that release on impact and fly toward the nearest target or ally. If they reach a target, they detonate in a blinding explosion. If they reach an ally, the moths grant your ally a void overshield. So first, looking at what it does by itself, for some odd reason, it doesn't say it, but as you can see, we have a second grenade charge. And those grenades have been overwritten to become the aforementioned moth cages. Also, if you already have 2 grenade charges, you're gonna get 3. Now, the grenades themselves are actually a bit complex in how they work, but they are very intuitive. They alter their effects based on their proximity to friendlies or enemies. 9 times out of 10, when you throw this grenade, you're going to get this result. You're gonna get 1 void and 1 arc moth to spawn. As for what each does, the Void Moth is going to track to you or an ally and grant a 22.5 HP overshield that will last 10 seconds. Now, as a reminder, Void Overshields are now a 70% damage reduction, which is pretty nuts. And as you'll see with this build, the Void Overshield has almost permanent uptime. But then swapping over to the Arc Moth, this one is a bit more simple. Once spawned, it's going to seek a nearby enemy and explode, dealing about 25,300 damage, at least here at Carl. Where this moth gets extra desirable though, is in the fact that it also blinds whatever its explosion hits. So you're getting some crowd control there. But what I like the most is how this means you can intrinsically stun unstoppable champions with your grenade. Now, before we can move on to our other source of moths, I want to showcase the other behaviors of this unique moth grenade. One comes from when you throw the grenade with no enemies nearby. This will convert both moths into void moths, giving you a full overshield from 1 grenade, assuming they both track to 1 person. The second behavior is the opposite, where if you throw your grenade with no allies nearby, they'll both become arc moths and wreak some havoc, with this probably being the more useful option of the 2 fringe cases. Also, I have noticed void moths can blow up and cause damage themselves, but that seems to only be when they accidentally collide with something and it's not intentional, so I wouldn't try to rely on that. But with our exotic armor piece, Mothkeeper's Wraps aside, we can now move on to our second source of moths, that being Ex Diris, which is going to take our energy slot. I actually just recently put out a video on this due to some pretty fantastic synergies that exist during episode Revenant, but we'll do a quick overview here too. The main thing making this an exotic is the fact that it's a hive boomer. You've got no mag and have a variable fire rate depending on your range meter, which is increased by dealing or taking damage. This unique GL frame per se also gives it incredible ammo economy. You're holding 39 at base, with it picking up about 13 shots per brick for both regular and scavenger bricks, which this on its own is a massive boon. Also, while we're here discussing little quirky things about Ex Diris, it's worth mentioning that it received the 50% nerf to self-damage despite not being a heavy weapon. So you're not really gonna hurt yourself all that much. But as for how Ex Diris fits into our moth spamming build, we have its exotic intrinsic loyal moths. This reads, final blows and rapid direct hits with this weapon create a loyal moth. The moth will seek out nearby targets and detonate, damaging and blinding them. We can see that happening here with the damage and performance being the exact same as the moths that come from our grenade. It's just that Ex Diris spawns moths much more frequently, as they'll spawn from any kill or 2 direct hits with a small 3-second cooldown between moth spawns. Now though, we can look at the synergy between the 2 exotics. It's pretty straightforward actually. Anytime Ex Diris spawns a moth, Mothkeeper's Wraps is going to spawn a second Void Moth. That means it's happening from kills and sustained damage. This rule is also absolute, as even if you're a mile away when Ex Diris spawns the moth, you'll get a void moth, and that's pretty much the only place it differs from the thrown moth grenades. So to give a summary of what we got so far, we have 2 grenade charges that spawn blinding and overshield granting moths when thrown, and Ex Diris is an incredibly ammo efficient GL that spawns the same when getting kills or dealing sustained damage thanks to the hidden exotic synergy. But with our 2 exotics aside, it's time to dive into our subclass to turn this into a true end-game build. Also, I do want to take a quick pause and ask you to subscribe if you are enjoying the video. I'll have lots of informative Destiny content and builds coming as we move into the next episode, so I would love to have you join the community. But now, back in our subclass, abilities aren't going to make or break this build. For the super, Golden Gun and Silk Strike are my go-to options. Usually it's Silk Strike because with the recent super changes, you can absolutely spam this thing. For our class ability, we run Gambler's Dodge for some higher uptime on our melee of choice, with that being Smoke Bomb for some on-demand weakened, although you can swap this out, especially during episode Revenant, because weaken is just everywhere. And for our grenade, you can run whatever flavor you like best. Mothkeeper's Wraps overrides the cooldown to always be a base of 73 seconds, so you can kind of just choose whatever you want. And then after our abilities, we have our aspects. You could use your preferred combo here, but as I try to make this as end-game viable as possible, our first aspect is Stylus Executioner, mainly for this effect, where we go invisible after defeating any debuffed enemy. This works perfectly with any of our moths, as when they get a kill or when we kill a blinded enemy, it'll make us invis at the same time. The next aspect we run is Threaded Spectre, for the decoy whenever we dodge. This decoy should absolutely not be underestimated. Bungie has been doing a lot of taunt type mechanics recently, and this was one of the abilities that actually started it all. When this clone goes down, it's fairly similar to actually just being invisible, as ads will 100% focus it. So while it might not seem like it, Threaded Spectre is totally a survivability aspect. But then finishing our subclass, we have the Fragments. The real important one is Facet of Dominance, so that our moths, which are considered arc damage, jolt enemies. This gives them increased lethality and the ability to stun overloads, while also retaining their blind so you can stun unstops. So you're getting 2 champions from one source. Although do keep in mind the moths spawned from Ex Diris do not get these benefits. They have to be from your grenade if you're trying to stun overloads. Next on the list of fragments is Purpose. This should give us either Woven Mail or Restoration if you use either of my recommended supers, but it's just going to be a super dependent source of survivability. Next is Facet of Protection for some free DR on top of the other DR sources like Overshield or Woven Mail. Then we have Facet of Dawn so that we can get Radiant from our melee, which if you use Smoke Bomb, that's an incredibly potent combo, giving you Weaken and Radiant in one button press. And lastly, we have Facet of Hope, so we get our class ability back more often whenever we have an elemental buff, which is most often going to be either amplified or Void Overshield. But now, out of our subclass, we have our weapons and armor. Weapons should likely be catered to your activity, or at least your kinetic weapon should. Where we can get an objectively good pairing comes with our heavy weapon, where Bittersweet is the often best option. Not only is it arc, but it has some crazy DPS synergy that requires its own entire video to understand, which, lucky for us, have already been made. So if you want to turn this into a DPS build, check out Dato's video linked in the top right where he goes over all of that. But if you're not going for max DPS, really any heavy should do just fine. And then after weapons, we have our armor. Stat-wise, resilience always needs to be prioritized, with the next focus on discipline or maximum moths. And after that, we have mobility and recovery being about equal in importance. And then for our mods, starting with the helmet, we're gonna run an arc siphon and whatever finders you want. For our arms, it's going to be a firepower, so our grenades spawn an orb whenever they get a kill. Bolstering detonation, so our grenades give us a little bit of dodge energy back. And impact induction, so our melee gives us some grenade energy back. Chest is for resists, run whatever your activity is calling for. Legs will have better already for health regen. Innervation for grenade energy on orb pickup, and arc scavenger. And then class is bomber for a bit more grenade when dodging, special finisher, and powerful attraction. And then now to finish the showcase before getting into our gameplay loop, the artifact does need to be mentioned. I don't want to dwell on this too long since this particular artifact is only going to exist for another week, but some no-brainer picks are Overload GL, Concussive Reload for weaken from GLs, and then the big one is Arc Compounding, so Ex Diris and Arc Moths gives themselves a 15% increase in damage against blinded targets. This is a big part of why Ex Diris can put out such fantastic DPS right now. But now, artifact aside, mods, weapons, everything else gone, it's now time for the gameplay loop. You begin by spawning moths. You can toss some nades or let loose with Ex Diris, but once moths have been spawned, you should soon have a void overshield, and whatever group of enemies you're facing will be blinded, which when they die, it's going to make you invisible. This is when you get aggressive. Continue to sling grenades via your hand or weapon. These kills will spawn moths and orbs, and while you're in the thick of it, dodge to drop a clone and keep the heat off of you. While you're dodging, Powerful Attraction is going to pick up all nearby orbs and keep the loop going. If a champ shows up, you have a method to deal with all three. Melee for barriers, grenade for unstops and overloads. Remember to use your super when you got it, because you will have it very often. Even I haven't adjusted to how often supers are up yet. And then outside of your super, Transcendence whenever you feel like it. Just know you will lose your moth grenades while in that mode. But the rest of the gig is just slay out and use special finishers when running low on ammo. Because remember, for whatever reason, Finder bricks are counted as full bricks for Ex Diris. This build is fantastic, and you can mix it up in a lot of ways, as I'm sure you've seen. But thanks to Prismatic, Mothkeeper's Wraps, and Ex Diris, that synergy has never been more potent, and I can't wait to take this into episode Heresy. And I think that's everything. Thank you so much for getting this far into the video. Your viewership means a ton. I hope you enjoyed the build. I hope you enjoy using it yourself. Again, dim link down below. You can totally make use of its most potent form right now, but I'm sure it's going to be great when Heresy launches next week. Also, again, thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me, support the channel, a like, a comment, a subscription goes a very long way. Almost at 12,000 subscribers. I would love to grow the community even more. If you want to support me and support the channel, but you can't think of a comment down below, moth spam. And with that, as usual, I hope you are having a great day, and I hope to see you around.